University campuses are facing unprecedented complexity, from behavioral concerns and protests to compliance obligations, labor dynamics, and emergency preparedness across decentralized environments. In this episode of Security Connected, host Ahlilah Longmire sits down with Christopher Connolly, Area Vice President overseeing security operations, to explore how campus security is evolving from compliance-driven models to proactive, intelligence-informed frameworks grounded in leadership, resilience, and human judgment.
When we think about campus security, many people still picture a traditional model: patrols, access control, and compliance checklists. But the reality for today's universities is far more complex. Campuses are managing evolving behavioral risk, protests, mental health concerns, research environments, residential life, and regulatory obligations, all while preserving an open academic culture. Today, we're going to talk about what campus leaders need to understand right now and what it really means to lead campus security at scale. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about such important conversations as we head into 2026.
Important is right. And I feel like this couldn't be a better time with all the things over the past few months that have happened in the media with higher education campuses, even down to, our elementary school system. So I want to jump right in and to start from your perspective, Chris, what are the top security risks campuses face today? And what's changed most in the last few years?
No, it's a great question. I would have to say one of the main threats that campuses are dealing with currently right now is targeted violence. And what's changed is it's far less random than it's used to be. Situations are now becoming really a lot more personal, and they're fueled by ideology or personal grievance. Even mental health stressors are playing a role in this, and they're often focused at specific groups, people, or events. And I think what's so challenging about this is that they don't necessarily start as crimes. So they're not easy to detect right away. They could start as, behavioral issues. They could be conduct issues on campus. They could be online behavior that escalates to a certain point. And very often they are directly correlated. The people involved are employees, they're students, they're affiliates, they could be former affiliates. So I think it's really changing how colleges and universities really have to look at how they manage their risk. I would say a second thing that we're seeing right next to targeted violence is an increase in activism on campus. We're seeing a lot more protests and demonstrations happening. And now, a lot of these, they're tied to socio-political issues. They could be tied to social justice issues, geopolitical, or even climate change. And a lot of them are in line kind of with the academic mission of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And a lot of them are peaceful. But what we're starting to see more of is they're garnering attention of counter-protesters. It has a tendency to become contentious, and that can really disrupt campus operations. So we're seeing more of that. And one of the other things that I'll point out that we're seeing is it's not just there's more demonstrations. We're starting to see more sophisticated demonstrations on campus. And what I mean by that is groups are very knowledgeable on university or campus policies. And so what they'll do is they'll push their demonstration sort of to the limit without necessarily crossing. And so it makes a really challenging situation for how college administration, leadership, and also safety and security handle these, because these are protected activities that you want to be very mindful of, but they sort of know what they're doing more than they have in years past. And I think that adds another level of challenge to how we look at these threats. And I would say the last piece in terms of what's changed is really the speed and the visibility of these threats. So these threats to include demonstrations and protests, they're evolving very quickly. They're rapidly coming together and they're manifesting quickly. And then I would say oftentimes they're externally amplified by way of social media. So they're becoming more public to the public eye. So there's a higher level of visibility and public eye on all of these situations that are going on campus. So again, in summary, it's less about the random violence that we're used to. It's more about targeted, fast-paced, quickly evolving threats that are really playing out publicly. And so there's this higher level of scrutiny on how safety and security in colleges are managing these.
That's really interesting. And before I, jump into the assessment, into action portion of this, when you talk about the random acts versus targeted, I often wonder, like, how many of these people are previous students, current students, or just know the campus because they live locally in the area and know the ins and outs. It feels like, it's becoming a little bit more, the groups are becoming either more students with mental health issues is rising. These groups are very, very clever with how they're targeting campuses, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's really what we're seeing is these ties somehow, whether directly or indirectly, they're tied to the university. And so it can be a current enrolled student or faculty member or employee, or it could be a former one, and they're holding on to these personal grievances, or at a larger, more macro level, their ideology is now becoming to the top of mind for them, and they're going back to sort of their roots or where they've had experiences at their university, where a lot of these thoughts were sort of generated at their origin. And so you're right. It's 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the focus was on crime statistics, things that are happening in the area, and a lot of these randomized crimes that were happening. And it's getting more pinpointed to being tied directly to something that somebody targeted that had some sort of affiliation to the university previously or currently.
Wow. Well, then this next question is very important to, university presidents or board members, which is, if you had 5 minutes with a university president or board member, what are the most important things they need to understand about campus safety today? I feel like you mentioned a little bit of it, but if you can take it a bit further.
Sure. So if I had a few minutes, I would focus on three main things. Because again, we're talking about high level, we're talking about presidents, we're talking about leaders in the university. But first and foremost, without question, I would be focusing and imploring to them to focus on proactive risk management. So understanding your campus's vulnerabilities, gaps that you have right now before something happens or before a situation turns into a crisis. And that's really everything from physical security all the way through their emergency communications and what that process looks like. Too often, we're seeing institutions implement their security measures after or post-incident. And at that point, it's too late. So again, doing this proactively and understanding your vulnerabilities, number one. Number two, I would implore them to build a culture of safety on their campus. So we talk a lot about hardening campuses with cameras, with access control and card readers, all very, very important in today's day and age, and particularly in 2026. But security is more than that. And I think as a leader of an institution, they should really focus on faculty, staff, employees, students. If they are more aware of security issues and thinking security, and then they feel empowered and confident enough to bring those issues up, I think the community overall becomes stronger because of that. And really, that's the leader's job to really start that process. And then I would say, lastly, leadership engagement from the top. When senior leaders champion security, it's enormously important. It helps to align all the different cross-functional groups that exist in a college campus. It's very decentralized. There's a lot of multidisciplinary units that are working. This will help align them on thinking of security, and I think that ultimately would drive smarter decision-making. So again, at the end of the day, security's not a standalone. It needs collaboration. It needs to be focused on preparation. And really those things start with a president or a board member or the leaders at that university to sort of set that tone.
I couldn't agree more. And, one of the thoughts as you were talking that came to my mind, I almost feel like really assessing your security, thinking as your security program as something as a must-have is also protecting the investments of your students as well, too. There's a protective element in there, too, that's so important, right? It goes beyond they're coming to get educated, to get degrees in somewhat, and the last thing they should have to be worried about is their safety, right? And so, yeah, it should be precedent of a priority.
And I think you're exactly right. And unfortunately, that is one of the things that are top of mind for parents when they're looking at sending their kids to a college, as much as it is the academic stature and what they've achieved. But they're also looking, at the most basic level is my child going to be safe at this college, university, institution? And if leadership of said college or institution is really prioritizing safety, it would be very evident through all of those areas. And I think that ultimately, back to your point, that's an investment into your enrollment, into your student body, making sure that they can come safely to a university and learn, because that's what they're there to do.
When campus leaders hear Clery Act compliance, and you're going to have to school me on what that is because it sounds as unsettling as I read it, should they actually be focused on improving campus safety and not just meeting, reporting requirements?
Yes, short answer, absolutely. And I would actually sort of flip the framing there, and I would say Clery compliance, it should be the byproduct of good campus safety. It shouldn't be the goal. And so I think when campuses look at Clery requirements, and really what they're obligated to do is it's making sure that they're transparent about documenting any crimes that are happening on or nearby their campus, and that they're doing timely reports to the community. So there are requirements that need to exist. So I think when universities look at that strictly as number one, they're thinking backwards, because what Clery's doing is it's giving you a set of statistics of things that have already happened, right? So a strong security culture and a strong security program should be saying, all right, well, what can we do to prevent what's happening next? So overall, campuses with strong safety and security programs, what they're doing is they have people that are out thinking of security issues. They're elevating security issues. They have strong communications, coordination, and collaboration. So Clery requirements sort of take care of themselves. So I think the best institutions, they use Clery as more of a risk intelligence tool than anything else, where you have all this data that you're regulated to maintain. And now you can sort of plot those things out and see what trends you have, where you have issues, of what genre of issues and how many, and you can start thinking about prevention strategies. So at the end of the day, what I would say Clery is, because it's not meant to be a paperwork exercise, although it is for each college, but it's really meant to drive transparency, right? So going back to the point about parents and sending their kids there, they should know what the crime stats are on that campus. They should know how many certain issues they've had of different crimes on their campus. So they're making an informed decision when they send their child there. And so obviously colleges and institutions are obligated to meet those to receive federal funding via Clery Act. But it's meant to drive transparency. It's meant to drive accountability so that schools are held accountable for what safety measures they're taking or what they're not taking. So at the end of the day, I would say colleges can be successful if they look at Clery sort of like a campus GPS, where you see on your GPS hazards where they've occurred. And now you can use that data to plot a safe path forward and how you can avoid such things going forward. So you want sort of Clery compliance to be a byproduct and not necessarily the goal. You want to focus on safe and secure security programs on your campus, number one.
If you have that information, right, it just kind of allows you to take a next step in being proactive, which is kind of a segue into my next question. What does a strong campus-wide vulnerability assessment look like in practice across academic buildings, residential life, and research environments?
Sure. So I would say that strong programs, security programs on college campuses, that they recognize that risk isn't uniform. And you look at a college campus, it's not just a cluster of buildings, right? So they're all very different. And a meaningful vulnerability assessment looks very different, really, depending on the environment. You mentioned academic buildings. Of course, when you do a vulnerability assessment of academic buildings, you're looking at the physical security. Yes, you need to see what cameras and card access systems are in place there, but you're also looking at sort of what the layout is in there in terms of movement patterns. What's occupancy levels in each of these classrooms? How do they egress out? Are there any things that exist that could be roadblocks to potential evacuation routes that could create congestion if there's an incident, and anything that could slow a response? So you really want to focus on that, because those buildings are going to have these large amount of students at any given time. When you look at residential life, very different. These are dynamic buildings, or these are 24/7 buildings that have a lot of activity, particularly off hours. So yes, you need to look at, in your vulnerability assessment, what the physical security is in place there, but you want to look more at policy as well. You want to see, what do they have in place for visitor policies, particularly nights, weekends? Are there tailgating related issues? What do we have in there for other security systems in terms of access control? How is the lighting set up on a dorm? You want to look at all those physical security elements, but I think you also want to look at what that residential facility has for personnel that can observe students on a 24/7 basis. So specifically looking at any observational behavior that you can see from maybe there's particular mental health issues that are happening. Is there a way or an escalation pathway for those to be observed and to be passed along, whether that's an RA, or are there security in the building that can pick up on these things? Because again, these are where students live 24/7. You talk about research, and that adds a whole nother level of complexity on a college campus. You're talking about a facility that has controlled or hazardous materials in it. They have very specific and sensitive data that's incredibly valuable. You have valuable equipment that's there. So when you look at a vulnerability assessment in a research facility, you're looking more at, well, what's the escalation processes in the event there is an issue? Where are their alarms? Where are those alarms going? Who is monitoring those alarms? And then what is the response protocol in the event there is an alarm? And with research facilities, often those are tied directly to campus safety, public safety, the police department, because of the sensitivity in what's being housed in those facilities. But you also have to include a department such as environmental health and safety in all that process. So at the end of the day, what you're looking at for like a strong vulnerability assessment through all these different buildings is, how does the physical security, how does the technology, and how does the human behavior all interact at those facilities in real world conditions? So not just this is how it plays out on paper. How do all those things interact in the real world or on our campus? And that's where you can truly find those vulnerabilities and those gaps in processes that you can proactively address.
That's interesting. And you mentioned the human behavior part. And I want to just take a minute to talk about people and training and that human element. We see a lot in the media and the news how security officers are often being tested way beyond their training, right? And so how should campus security teams support sensitive issues like protest and real mental health incidents without overstepping their role?
Another good question, and I think that's the key piece without overstepping our role, because sometimes you can do more harm than good. So those areas you just mentioned are incredibly sensitive. And what I would say from a campus security standpoint, our role is pretty uniform across all of them, and that's based on providing safety and support. And it's not enforcement. So when you talk about Title IX, for us as security or safety professionals on a college campus, we're there again to support. We can secure a scene if need be, but our primary function is to get the information, document the information as accurately, and escalate it in a timely fashion to the appropriate people who can get it to the correct office or the Title IX office. Where we wouldn't go and where we wouldn't want to overstep is on any sort of enforcement or investigation of a Title IX related issue, right? There are specific designees at a college campus, a Title IX office to handle that. If it did escalate to a crime, then that would be, your police department, your campus police department, or your local municipality that would be handling that. Our role is to provide support and to document and escalate in Title IX. And that's important for security to know. When it comes to protests, I would say similar, where we're there monitoring safety of people and of property, right? We're trying to support that, but support a lawful activity of expression that's happening. But what we don't want to do is escalate, and we don't want to instigate, and we don't want to overstep. So we're there to really monitor, protect, contain, and de-escalate if need be. We start overstepping and we're going to cause a lot more problems on a college campus. And then for mental health issues on campus, we're seeing more and more and more of this happening. You got to think students are under tremendous academic pressure. They're under tremendous social pressures. There's a lot of stressors that can impact them. So for us as security, our role is, and this comes into training, but we need to be able to observe any warning signs, observe behavior that we're seeing when we're out, particularly in a dorm or an academic building, and know how to see those warning signs. And then again, support, provide comfort, but certainly escalate in terms of getting the proper people involved that need to intervene. And generally that's licensed clinicians through the university's health services and their offerings, and making sure we can pass that along and do it in the right way. What we're not going to do is don a clinician hat. We're not going to do anything more than that, but we need to be there to support and to provide comfort. So I think knowing the boundaries and then partnering effectively is sort of where we want to stay.
What security services should they be adding to their mix? Mobile, remote, risk intelligence?
Sure. I mean, guarding alone can't adequately cover some of these large scale universities' challenges. So for me, when I look into my experience, I think both mobile and remote guarding are vital, that colleges should be looking at implementing or integrating into their security program. Campuses are very decentralized, as I mentioned. They're spread out. Often they can be over a huge geographic area. And remote guarding and mobile allows our security staff to, essentially it acts as a force multiplier for us. So we can touch more of the campus, provide more outreach to more of the campus. And that way it's helping build the safety net wider than just boots on the ground security could do. So I think coupling guarding with remote and with mobile is tremendously helpful. And I would absolutely highly recommend risk intelligence platform through, our risk intelligence center or the like. It's almost non-negotiable nowadays, in my opinion, when we talk about being preventative and predicting. Risk intelligence is a way that we can get a lot of information funneled in to us as a security department or to a pinpoint to a university. And you can use that as actionable intelligence. And you can use the actionable intelligence, the analytics, and you can turn it into divisive action. And you can have that directly correlate to measurable risk reduction. So those three elements I would look at absolutely implementing into any security program, particularly in higher ed, just because of the vast area and decentralized nature of most college campuses.
And if you have that mix of mobile, remote, risk intelligence, how does that fall into the training of the officers? Does it make it more effective? What does specialized officer training look like in higher education?
Well, that's a great question too. And I would say training is one of the most important pieces in higher ed. It's not like other verticals in the security industry. It's very different. And so I would say first, effective training, you need to instill into your staff understanding the campus culture, right? Understanding what the academic mission is on college campuses, and really at the particular college, what is its institutional values? So they need to really understand that, but then they need to understand what it's like to be security in a student-centered environment. It's very different. They're going to have thousands of interactions with students day to day. And what I was mentioning earlier is you're talking about students that may be away from home for the first time in their life. They may be 3,000, 5,000, you name it, thousands of miles away from their house, from their home where they grew up. And they're under tremendous academic and social stressors. So it's important to instill into the training program that element of how we interact with students on a day-to-day basis, showing compassion, making sure that you're treating everyone with dignity, because at the end of the day, security can only be successful on a college campus if there's trust. And so I think it starts there in your training, and that's a specialized training element unique to higher ed. Second, I would say de-escalation training. And what I mean by that is equipping your security team to handle high-stress situations. So on a college campus, generally they're dealing with a lot of high-stress situations with students, not maybe necessarily crime, but we're talking about students that are in some level of crisis. So can we handle those situations? Can we handle an actual crisis situation? Do we keep our calm and confidently know how to conduct our duties and address the situation without sort of losing the mindset of what the escalation pathways are and how to conduct ourselves? And then I would say what's very important as well is the legal and regulatory awareness. We touched on that a little bit, making sure that our staff come in and they know what these rules are, what Clery is, what the regulations are, what are our obligations as a security provider, as a campus security authority on campus. We're obligated to report, where we're obligated to report, how we're obligated to report, what locations. So understanding that and then understanding the Title IX piece as well is a very important piece to ensure that our staff know coming in that they're well aware of these elements and legal and regulatory awareness pieces. And then the last thing I would say, kind of going back to your piece, was scenario-based training, where our staff understand what their role is, where they work, what their security responsibilities are, whether or not they're involved in any of their mobile patrols, if they're involved in remote guarding, if they're boots on the ground, if they're access control, front lobby posts. But you drill and you train and you exercise. And I think a lot of colleges or security programs at colleges will bring people in and sort of, this is what your job duties are. And they don't necessarily actively get engaged in scenario-based training. And looking specifically at those high risk, high impact situations, that's where you need to focus in on your drilling and your exercising. And then I would just say any training, specialized for higher ed or otherwise, it needs to be continuous. You need to continue to train. You can't just do it, set it and forget it. You need to continue to update and drive continuous improvement. And you can do that through training. And it really should be enforced day to day through good field supervision and good managers. And that's really important, particularly in higher ed.
What I gather from everything you've said thus far is that really having a strategic security program with specialized officer training really helps universities and colleges balance campus safety while also preserving the student experience, right? Which is key. What lessons have you learned from managing security across a complex, high-profile campus that other universities should consider as they evaluate their own programs?
If I had to point out a few, I would say number one, security can't operate in a silo. It absolutely cannot, particularly at a college campus. There are so many departments. There are so many decentralized natures of schools and stakeholders, people that all have a buy-in security, but they operate in the siloed fashion. You cannot be successful. It's about collaboration and it's about relationships. You cannot make security work in higher ed without having strong relationships with all of these different groups. Invest in people, integrate security into the culture, and work collaboratively. Those are the key pieces to me that I think are needed to have success in higher education security.
Chris, today's conversation was so insightful, and I feel like just even personally, you've debunked a lot of questions and things that, I look at the news and I'm like, well, why didn't I know this? Or why did they do this? And I think you brought a lot of insight and knowledge to just a very, heightened society of incidents and mental health issues, and really touched upon how strategic security programs make all the difference. I can't thank you enough for today's conversation. Please come visit us again, and we can talk a little bit more about university concerts or something next.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the time. There is no lack of content to talk about when we're talking about safety and security in the higher education world. So happy to join you anytime to discuss further.